Hello, and thanks so much for joining the Invisible Americans podcast with Jeff Madrick and Carol Jenkins. We address the travesty of child poverty here.
There are nearly 13 million children living in serious material deprivation in America, and we don't see them. They are our invisible Americans, and we plan to change that.
A couple of words about us. The podcast is based on Jeff's book, Invisible Americans, The Tragic Cost of Child Poverty. He's an economics writer, author of 7, and co-author of another 4 books on the American economy.
And Carol is an Emmy-winning journalist, activist, and author, most recently president of the ERA Coalition, working to amend the Constitution to include women.
And we are longtime colleagues and friends. In this episode of the podcast, we share the recent conversation between Los Angeles Mayor Karen Bass and former Congresswoman Carolyn Maloney of the Roosevelt House Institute of Public Policy. It's called Hope for the Unhoused. Mayor Bass describes L.A.'s unsheltered crisis, 46,000 people living on the streets in the city, and how she is moving them into homes. Unhoused children are a troubling part of this crisis. They are introduced by the Institute's director, Harold Holzer.
I'm Harold Holzer, and I have the honor of serving as director of Roosevelt House. And on behalf of Hunter President Nancy Cantor, it's a pleasure to welcome you tonight for a very special event with a very special guest, the Mayor of Los Angeles, the Honorable Karen Bass. Now, I know that you know that New York and Los Angeles are engaged at the moment in a rather emotional rivalry out in Queens. And while everyone in New York thinks that we know everything about everything, including sports, of course, I think we all agree, or we would not be here in the crowding into this room. We all know that we have a lot to learn from Los Angeles, where the issue of housing the unhoused is concerned. And that subject is just one of the topics that have brought us together this evening to hear about Mayor Bass's innovative approach to homelessness, to discuss the whole gamut of municipal challenges that face the big cities on both American coasts and, of course, in between. And as someone who worked briefly for a New York mayor, as well as for a governor and 2 different candidates for mayor, although it's only 2 people, even though those are 4 different jobs. And one of those people also served as a pioneering congresswoman, and I'm talking about Bella Abzug, Hunter class of 1942 and class president of 1942. Speaking for her, this is a very convoluted sentence here. Speaking for her, and I was her spokesman, so I did speak for her, I suspect this kind of dialogue is just what Bella's idol, I'm coming to the point now, her idol Eleanor Roosevelt had in mind. Because the same year Bella graduated, Eleanor helped negotiate the sale of this, her longtime New York City home, to Hunter College as a center for student harmony and civic engagement of the highest order. 80 years ago, when the official transfer was made, deeding this house to the college, Eleanor represented her husband at Hunter's brand new main campus assembly hall, which of course had been built by FDR's Public Works Administration. Many mayors of different cities, from David Dinkins to Pete Buttigieg, have appeared here at Roosevelt House. But that ceremony was enlivened by New York's crusading mayor Fiorello LaGuardia. And it's notable that together with FDR, and we must confess, Bob Caro, forgive me, Robert Moses, had begun building more units of public housing for the poor than any administration ever. And that was during the Great Depression. So with that complex but compelling legacy in mind, this is indeed the perfect place, and that was the point I started about 2 pages ago, to welcome our distinguished guest, the building that served as the transition headquarters for FDR after his election to the presidency, and thus served as the birthplace of the New Deal, and also served as the springboard for Eleanor's own life of activism in pursuit of social justice, civil rights, women's rights, and global human rights. There are so many people I see in the audience who I should acknowledge, but certainly Gillian Sorensen, who is bringing the Sorensen Center to Roosevelt House in due course. It's all but done, and we're excited to have her here. Not the first time she's been here, but another of the many times we hope to welcome her and do programs with her in the future. And I also want to acknowledge New York's favorite daughter, former borough president and city council member, the great Gail Brewer. Pete? So with that, let me introduce our guests. It's a special honor, as I said, to welcome Karen Bass, the 43rd mayor of Los Angeles and the first Black woman to lead that city of 3.8 million people. She is a Los Angeles native who went to Cal State, San Diego State, and USC for her master's in social work. I guess nobody's perfect. She was a long way from the Silberman School at Hunter College, so we can forgive her that. Longtime community activist, Mayor Bass served for 6 years in the California State Assembly, rising to majority leader, and then for 2 years was the 67th Speaker, and as usual for this groundbreaking public servant, the first Black woman to hold that post, from which she championed improvements in the child welfare system, in cultural redevelopment and tax reform, despite a severe budget crisis. In 2010, she was elected to Congress, where she served 6 terms with great distinction until her election as mayor, serving on the Judiciary Committee and at one point chairing the Congressional Black Caucus. In City Hall, she turned immediately to work on the homelessness crisis by declaring a citywide state of emergency, and then moved 21,000 unsheltered people indoors in her first year in office, signing executive orders to fast-track the process of building affordable housing, initiatives we hope to hear much more about this evening. She has also been extremely nuanced on housing development, which I hope to hear more about, respecting the special status of L.A.'s historical districts and acknowledging density issues in single-home communities. Her interlocutor this evening will be her one-time House colleague, Carolyn Maloney, who ably represented Manhattan's East Side and parts of Brooklyn and Queens for 15 terms in Congress, working tirelessly and effectively on 9/11 compensation, credit card reform, many, many other issues, rising to chair the House Oversight Committee. And she's serving her second year as our Eleanor Roosevelt Distinguished Leader in Residence. So she's serving 2 years. She has to run again next year. And she's already led student trips, student cohorts focused largely on her untiring commitment to ratify, or maybe a better way to say it, working with Carol Jenkins, to acknowledge and certify the ratification of the ERA. So this is a meeting of giants. Housekeeping. We will have a conversation of about 40 or 45 minutes, followed by an opportunity for you to ask questions of your own. During that process, I know you all have wonderful voices, but please wait for the microphones to be brought to you so that our Zoom audience can also benefit from hearing your questions. After the program, we will all adjourn to the Four Freedoms room upstairs, the Roosevelt's former dining rooms, for a reception in honor of Mayor Bass. And with that, please join me in welcoming Los Angeles Mayor Karen Bass in conversation with New York's own Carolyn Maloney.
First of all, I want to thank all of you for coming to Roosevelt House. I am so pleased to welcome you and our special guest, Mayor Bass. Our nation's second largest city, and they have some of the same complexities and challenges that we have in New York. Maybe we have a little more. So I'm very interested in how she approached these challenges and solved many of them. We have a very small but mighty staff here at Roosevelt House, and They went beyond the call of duty in putting this together. I want to thank them. And I see some of our advisory committee chairs and board members here. So please join me in thanking them for their hard work to make this happen. Quite honestly, Karen Bass is one of my favorite former colleagues. I loved working with her. She was extremely effective. She was the chair of the subcommittee on the Foreign Affairs Committee, and we worked closely together on foster care on a task force that she formed while she was in Congress. We also worked very hard on a bill that I authored, the Debbie Smith bill. We reauthorized it 2 or 3 times, and it has been called the most important anti-rape bill ever. In short, she was an outstanding member of Congress, and she has a history of, first, as Harold pointed out, as the first African-American woman in our nation's history to lead the lower house of any state legislative body, probably one of the most difficult jobs in government, and also a member of Congress and the first mayor of Los Angeles. Some would say that leaving Congress to go to mayor of Los Angeles is leaving the national stage to go to a state stage. And it must have been a very difficult decision and a high risk. What made you do it? And was it a tough decision to make?
Well, first of all, thank you, everyone, for having me here. And it's very nice to connect again with my esteemed colleague, Congresswoman Maloney. We've traveled, we've been to Africa together, we've done a lot of different trips, and thank you. I also think it's so appropriate, your title, the Eleanor Roosevelt Distinguished Leader in Residence, that so suits you. So congratulations to Hunter College and the Roosevelt House for doing that. It was a tough decision. I didn't leave because I was tired of Congress at all. As a matter of fact, the hardest part of the decision, though, was leaving the foreign affairs. I chaired the subcommittee on Africa, and that was a big focus. But I was compelled to go home because I was worried that Los Angeles was getting ready to make a sharp turn to the right. And I didn't want to see that happen. And I had spent, a few decades with other activists moving L.A. in a more progressive direction. L.A. was not a union town. It was much more conservative, 30 years ago. And after all of that time, the idea that we would flip back and move to the right over the issue of homelessness. And ironically, 30 years ago, I was working on it. But during those years, the homeless population was in South Central Los Angeles and Skid Row, and nobody was really concerned. Now the problem has exploded to be everywhere. And I know you have some of this in New York. I haven't been here in a while, but the tent cities, encampments, which I think a lot of people viewed as individuals and don't realize that the encampments, the tents, are actually small communities. And they had exploded so much in every area, the affluent areas, the inner city areas, that a lot of people in Los Angeles was reaching the point where they said, just get rid of these people. I really don't care what happens to them. And that's what concerned me. So in our city, our population of the unhoused is about 46,000. If you look at our county, it's 70,000. So that is a massive, massive problem. So I did take a big risk because I most certainly didn't know I would win, especially when one of Los Angeles's billionaires jumped in the race.
Well, you mentioned that homelessness and the fight over how to approach it was one of the main reasons that you left. And and we were sorry to see you go. You were such an outstanding member. But during her first year, this is amazing, she moved more than 21,000 people out of the roughly 70,000 she's talking about into housing. So basically from 2022 to 2024, there was a 17% drop in homelessness. And I find this an amazing accomplishment. And I have to mention we have two of our city council members here, our distinguished Gail Brewer introduced earlier, but Eric Botcher. And I would say this is one of the biggest problems we're confronting now. I'm so happy to see you here to talk about it with her. But how did you do it?
Let me qualify that number, because I'm proud of the number. But what that doesn't tell you is the inflow. And that's what's really, really a problem. And I don't know of any city that has mastered that. So you can get 200 people off the street and 215 more are on the street the very next day. And so we've launched a comprehensive approach in several different ways. One of our areas is to prevent people from becoming unhoused. So we're focusing on people who face eviction. And because of actions that our city council took, we now know every eviction. We know who's going to be evicted and what their name and their address is. So becoming mayor, I also inherited 2 nonprofits that previous mayors had. One of them is called the Mayor's Fund, and my previous colleague, Eric Garcetti, who's now the ambassador to India, he used the Mayor's Fund to deal with COVID, with families that were most in need. So when I took over, I repurposed it to focus on homelessness prevention. The bottom line with this is we're experimenting because we don't have a model that we can replicate. But I was telling Carolyn, for the council members, I know your numbers might be higher in New York, but you guys have handled the problem better. And so 20 years ago when I came here looking at what you guys were doing, I was in the state legislature. Unfortunately, we didn't emulate it. But what you did was you guys invested in interim housing. You bought apartment buildings and hotels. What we did was rigidly held to the dogma of housing first. Now, I believe in housing first. Of course I do. But the way it was implemented in L.A. really meant stay in a tent until we build you something. They didn't mean that. You know what I mean? But that's actually what happened. As opposed to thinking that we need some place for people to be for a couple of years, I think that a lot of times policies are done with great intentions at the moment. But then down the line, there's unintended consequences. So I'm sure when L.A. rigidly held to that is because they didn't want to see people languish in shelters and they wanted to push the building. But even though I've passed measures to expedite building's building. It still takes a couple of years. We didn't account for that.
Well, Karen has also just been appointed chair of the Homeless Committee for the U.S. Conference of Mayors. And I believe they are looking at replicating what you did in California to other cities and other states. And can you comment on that in your work there?
Sure.
And what's happening there?
Sure. Well, one thing is that it is extremely helpful to me that I served in Congress and served in the state legislature. And one thing about Congress is that, you're there for a long time and you develop lifelong relationships, whether you're there or not. That's why when she calls, I come. So what I did was when I took over the task force on homelessness, then I immediately started organizing mayors with a focus on Republican mayors, by the way. And so we took 40 mayors to D.C. Earlier this year. We met with the White House, we met with the Senate, we met with the House, and we were focused on one specific area of policy, which you guys might be interested in knowing, because after a year and a half, we finally changed this policy. We don't realize that a lot of policies we have on every level cause people to be homeless or keep people on the street. So listen to this one. They're really crazy, too. If you're a veteran and we give you veterans benefits, we count those benefits as your income. And then we tell you make too much money, so I won't give you the housing voucher. So all around the country, we have thousands of empty beds and vouchers, and veterans can't have them because they make too much money. Just like, and by the way, one of the crusades that your congresswoman waged nobly, unfortunately, every year, was the health benefits for the 9/11 survivors. You should have never had to do that. And no veteran should ever have to choose between their benefits or a housing voucher.
Well, with your help, we finally passed it and made it an entitlement, the only entitlement authored by an individual congressperson. The rest of the entitlements are Medicare, Medicaid.
She would every year she would wear the fireman's uniform on Congress.
Well, while you're on it, while you're on it, what should the federal government be doing to address housing?
Well,
let me tell you, Carter was the last president that really put money, serious money behind
we have
housing.
another one coming up.
Oh, yes, that's right.
Big
Yes.
priority.
Yeah.
Had to
We
get
have
that in
another
there.
great one coming up.
But let me just on the veteran piece, so you know. So it was changed. Like 95% of it was. It's a couple of little glitches. So veterans vouchers now can be used by any veteran, and also we raised the amount of rent because just like New York and L.A., I mean, we don't pay Nebraska rents. So having a voucher that pays, $1,500 doesn't do anything for us in our cities. So we were able to raise the amount. So now you might want to think about that. Well, I spoke to Secretary McDonough yesterday, and I asked him, I want to do now a big PR campaign in L.A. It might be something you think about too, calling on Angelenos to do their patriotic duty and take in a veteran and have the money, and the veteran. Now the glitch we're dealing with now is we need the VA to process the veterans, which you will too. So my appeal to McDonough is speed it up. We got the vouchers. We have the beds. We need the veterans.
What would your wish be for federal help and support besides veterans changes and funding?
Well, we need to repeat what happened after World War II. When there was housing built everywhere, of course, it was segregated, so African Americans couldn't take advantage of it. But, this time we need to have a housing boom. One policy we did in L.A., because again, like I said, you can do policies and then there's unintended consequences. So I did one that had unintended consequences, and so I had to change it. That was my executive directive one that essentially fast-tracked building. And what happened is if for-profit developers found a couple of loopholes and were getting ready to wipe out neighborhoods and stuff. And some people have interpreted that as being protective of the wealthy. Actually, I am being protective of the inner city because what they were getting ready, they only wanted to buy in the inner city, which would have displaced a lot of people. So I'm just a big believer that when you do policies, you got to evaluate the policies. You have to have metrics. You got to have outcome measures. You can't just do policies and then walk away. But unfortunately, too many people in our profession do that. We do policies and we celebrate the policy and never look back.
You're so right. And you've been working on a new approach to prevent people from falling into homelessness. Can you talk about that aspect of your strategy?
Sure, that's the mayor's fund. And what we do when we see that someone is going to be evicted, the courts have to report that information to us. Then we send outreach workers out. Number one, a lot of times when people are on the margins, they might not realize they actually qualify for a lot of public benefits. So we help them qualify for whatever is available. But we also supply legal support because most of the time, people are not represented, but the landlord is. And just being represented alone is enough to prevent an eviction. So this is experiment. I also am having it evaluated by an outside academic to make sure it's actually making a difference. I'm not trying to do it just to make a point. I want to know whether this works. But around the country, we have to come up with innovative ways to prevent people from falling into homelessness.
In your attempts to address homelessness, what was new and what was simply an improvement on what was already done before? Being more efficient?
A lot of things were already being done before, but within our city, there was a lot of finger pointing between the city and the county, the state, the federal government. Everybody was pointing fingers at each other. So one of the first things I focused it on was unifying the public sector. So we're all working in sync now and not pointing fingers. And our gap, though, is the private sector. So bringing in the private sector, we started another organization that's another 501c3 that is called LA for LA. And that's where we're looking at private investors, to come in on projects, understanding people want to return. It's not going to be a big return, some return. And of course, we're looking for philanthropic support too, so that we can move into buying buildings. Because again, building buildings just takes too long, even when you expedite it.
Well, part of your strategy was moving people into hotels, which we are doing here in New York, and renting interim housing, but it's very, very expensive. Right. What are some of the other strategies we can have to implement to bring the costs down and reach scale?
Yeah, what we're doing now is definitely not financially sustainable long term. No. So we are putting people in motels. But when I came in, it was, first of all, on my first day, I didn't go to City Hall. I went to the emergency department and put the city in a state of emergency, which gave me additional authority and the ability to expedite things. Our city needed to see tents go down. That's what they needed to see. Understanding that the system is fundamentally broke. But if I had come into office and said, I'm going to spend 6 months studying why it's broke, the city would have blown up. So I focused on a program called Inside Safe, getting people off the street, because I wanted to dispel the myth. I was gambling. I didn't know if I could dispel it, but we did. It is just not true that people want to be on those streets. People do not want to live like that. And so we do not have a problem getting people off the street. Our problem is, not having enough rooms. The other big problem from my point of view that we've not solved yet, but I'm dead set on solving it, and that is the appropriate services. So we provide services, but they're not adequate in my point of view. And one of my many lives, I've been around for a while, was in healthcare. And so I also view this issue from a health lens. And to me, that is woefully inadequate. And I'm not just talking about mental health and substance abuse. I'm talking about diabetes and hypertension and dental care, and the basics is really not adequately provided for.
Well, talking about your response and how you acted on your very first day that you were sworn into office, you announced a state of emergency for homelessness in the city and moved to take steps to help. And how did homelessness become such a huge problem, so out of scale, so overwhelming in Los Angeles?
Well, and this is a national phenomena. I mean, my view of it is that it is the outcome of very bad policies that were done in the 90s, and over time, the shredding of our social safety net. And I mean, I watched this happen, and all of us did, and we fought it every step of the way. We didn't win. And so the other thing is that it's really important to view the unhoused population for who they are. And there's a variety of reasons why people are unhoused. Some of our policies make people unhoused. For example, I mentioned the veterans. Foster care, when kids, quote unquote, are emancipated, which is a horrible term in my view, either 18 or 21, we literally pack your bags and say goodbye. Now, all of us are middle class here. Not a one of our kids could have survived when they were 18 if they weren't texting us 5 times a day and we weren't there to do everything they needed. So you just imagine your 18-year-old being put on the street, what would happen? They spend a few months couch surfing and then they're on the street. If you're a girl, you're liable to end up trafficked. And that is what we have done as a society. When we downsized our prison system, which many of us, like myself, fought for, I was very upset when the policies were in place and nobody prepared what was going to happen when they got out of jail. Now, our fastest growing sector of the unhoused population, and I bet it is yours too, are people in their late 60s and 70s, elders. Disproportionately women, of course, disproportionately people of color. But just think about it for a minute. You spent your life working in the service sector, no pension, no 501c3. In New York and L.A., if you have Social Security, that can buy you lunch. It was not going to house you. And your rent goes up when you can no longer work and you don't have a family to take you in, you're on the street. And if you look at, people who are mentally ill are using drugs, but understand that it's a chicken and egg. Because a lot of people in L.A., in spite of our temperature, a lot of people in L.A. use meth when they become homeless to stay awake at night so they survive. And I challenge any of you to sleep on the street for 2 weeks and tell me your mental health is the same. So we tend to pass judgment on individual behavior with not understanding the consequences. But we shredded our safety net. I mean, Reagan started it by block granting. Everybody thinks of mental health with Reagan, but they started the block granting. They called it devolution for anybody that remembers those policies. It sounded nice and fancy. All it was the federal government divesting from social safety net. So we let all of these things fall. And then welfare reform, of course. I remember when welfare reform was being proposed in the 90s, I was running a nonprofit organization. We did everything we could to fight it because we knew that then the next category of homeless were going to be women and children. Prior to welfare reform, that was not the case. And so systematically over the years, all of these policies. Now, I haven't even mentioned the price of housing. Obviously, that's one, but people tend to reduce it all to the price of housing, and it is more complicated than that.
Well, have you gotten bipartisan support for your initiatives?
Well, New York and L.A. are the same. We're blue, blue, blue. We don't have Republicans on our city council. Oh, you like that? And we don't have Republicans on our no. But I certainly got. But there is bipartisan support in the U.S. Conference of Mayors, absolutely, and that's why it was important to bring Republican mayors to Washington D.C. But from D.C., from our perspective, when we were there, this was viewed as a problem of Democratic cities, and but now the economic situation is such that people are experiencing an unhoused population everywhere.
And you mentioned the veterans. What are the specific challenges for homeless veterans, and aren't they a larger percentage in the homeless, or a very large percentage?
No, they are a percentage, but they're not the largest percentage, no. I think, the biggest thing is that, our veterans have some challenges. Some veterans have difficulty going inside, by the way. And some people who have difficulty going inside, this is sad, but sometimes they'll take their tents inside. And so it's a process for people to, leave that space. I know I found that over the years in working with formerly incarcerated people, sometimes have difficulty and feel better, in a smaller space. So you have to deal with the specific needs of the veterans. But I'm gambling, and you can ask me in a few months whether this works. I mean, half the time I try stuff. I don't know if it's going to work, but you got to try, right? With this campaign, I think that the public will be more empathetic and take in a veteran. I think people are empathetic towards senior citizens. People are empathetic to know that one of the reasons why women are unhoused is because of domestic violence. We have 9,000 children who are unhoused on our streets, and I'm sure your numbers are probably the same too. In and out of school, hiding in cars. A lot of times the children are not necessarily in tents. Sometimes you don't see these people because they're hiding, especially the women and children. They don't want Children's Protective Services to come take their kids away.
And to talk about challenges, you also have the challenge of climate change. And what is that impacting on housing and the unhoused? And what are you doing about it?
Well, thank you for asking that. I think that's where we're so lucky in our cities because, climate change is not, I know it's not a controversial subject here. Where we were, it was a debate, Yeah. I mean, remember the guy that brought the snowball to say that it gets cold? Those are our senators. But the way climate change in this issue is impacting us is our climate emergencies and emergency shelters were only related to rain and cold. And, it does rain occasionally in LA and it does get cold occasionally. But we didn't think about shelters in heat. And now we have to because we've gone through, it's still hot in LA. It can stay hot in LA throughout October. And sometimes we have heat waves in October. So I think last week in some areas it was triple digit. And if you can fry an egg on a sidewalk, then what do you think happens to the unhoused population? The other thing is that we don't really have shelters for them because a lot of our shelters during the cold don't have air conditioning. That's the other thing in LA. A lot of housing has no air conditioners because we haven't needed them, and now we do.
What about the wildfires? Is that affecting the unhoused?
It is affecting the unhoused, and it's very dangerous because there are unhoused people that camp up in the mountains. And the wildfires now, we've always had fires, but because of climate change, now it's like fires. We used to have fire season. It's kind of like we don't have fire season anymore. Fires can happen at any time. And they also are devastating. I never remember people dying in wildfires, but they do now. And so you can have unhoused. Unhoused people oftentimes get blamed with starting the wildfires. We do have a real problem with fires related to unhoused folks because they start fires to cook. They start fires for heat. And in some places in the city, the number one reason the fire department is called is to put out fires related to the unhoused.
Moving to a more pleasant subject, I read that Los Angeles is in the middle of world events, that you're going to have the World Cup in 2026.
We share that.
And 4 years away from hosting the Olympics. You want to comment on how that happened and what you're looking forward to?
It didn't happen by me. I ran to deal with the homelessness issue. But my predecessor was awarded the Olympics. Los Angeles will be one of 3 cities in history to host the Olympics 3 times, 1932, 84, and 28. So I do have a series of events coming up. In 2026, at the beginning, All-Star basketball game. A few months later, U.S. Open for golf for women. Then we both share the World Cup. You have the last one. We have the first one. We have 8 games. But in both of our cities, the World Cup is 40 days. So whether a game is here or not, there's going to be events. 2027, we have the Super Bowl, but then we get around to the Olympics. So we have a lot going on, and I am hoping that all of this will help fast-track housing and getting our people housed, because we don't want the world to come to L.A. to see, some of these places look worse than refugee camps. At least refugee camps are organized. But anyway, yes, so we have a lot going on.
Sounds exciting. Well, Madam Mayor, you are coming up on your 2-year anniversary of being in office. Can you share what it was like to serve the people of Los Angeles for the last 2 years?
Well,
was it harder than Congress?
Times 20. Wow. You'll appreciate this. I had 3 weeks to transition to being mayor. My election took a minute for the results to be decided, and then I had to take office. I've never worked for the city before. As a matter of fact, when I went into the mayor's office the first time, I kind of looked around and went, I've only been here about 3 times. And usually when I would come to City Hall, I was bringing 200 residents with me because we were protesting some land use situation. And so it was interesting taking over. It's been exhilarating because for me, it feels like my life has come full circle. Most of my life, I was an activist, a community organizer. My day job was working in the emergency room at the county hospital and also at the university at the medical school. So I was working on all of this stuff as a volunteer, and then I started a social justice nonprofit that eventually led to me running office. So issues I've been working on for over 30 years, I now am in the cat's bird seat, and I get an opportunity to do something. So it's kind of instant gratification, whereas in Congress, you work for years, you get to think long term, you get to become an expert, but you can choose your issues. I can't choose these issues.
I love mayors. They were my favorite members of Congress because they just wanted to get things done, and we're used to getting things done. And what I loved about the city council, I served on the city council for 10 years, is that you see the policies affecting people's lives. We are locked up there, but you can see the policies being translated into helping people.
You guys have term limits?
Yeah.
8 years?
We are at Hunter College. And we have many outstanding students here, so we would like you to give them some advice. Would you encourage them to enter public life to help people? Do you think they're going to be discouraged that they can't help as fast as they want to? What advice would you give to our students that are studying now here at Hunter College?
Well, to me, there is nothing more rewarding in life than to help folks and to make a difference that's bigger than just your own self. But to me, running for office is one area. Again, first time I ran for office, I was in my 50s. So the majority of my life was spent outside being an activist. And so there's roles for you to make a difference in so many different ways. And I would just say, if you are interested in running for office, as our speaker, Pelosi, would say, know your why. Why? Why are you doing it? Sometimes people approach me and they want to run for office and they don't really know why. They think there's something glamorous about it. I don't know about you guys. You found any glamour? Did you find any glamour? I haven't.
It's hard work.
It's very, very hard work. But again, it's just extremely rewarding. There's nothing more rewarding to me than to go out with the outreach workers and to talk to folks in a tent and to tell them, you deserve more than this. No one should live like this. Come on inside. Nothing beats that.
Well, I hate to close this extraordinary discussion, but I hope you all join me in thanking our thanks to Mayor Bass and Eleanor Roosevelt Distinguished Leader Carolyn Maloney. By the way, while this discussion was going on, speaking of great events you're going to host, the Mets have taken a 10-2 lead over the Dodgers. But that means that L.A. is going to get the last game. So, I don't know. Wins
and I'll
lose.
be there.
Yeah. So, please, let's continue the conversation upstairs over a glass of wine. Thank you.
Thanks so much for joining us on the Invisible Americans podcast, available wherever you get your podcasts. But we urge you to visit our website for transcripts, show notes, research, and additional information about our guests and their work. That's www.theinvisibleamericans.com. Please follow us on social media and our new YouTube channel. And our blog posts are up on Medium as well as our website. That's www.theinvisibleamericans.com. Jeff and I will see you the next time.